Can you actually save a nation that worships ignorance, abhors progress, and considers human life to be the cheapest commodity it can find? Well, that's the question I've decided to answer in this video. God help me. The universe of Warhammer 40k is built, at least in part, on the idea that everything is broken and nothing will ever get better. The Imperium of Man only barely survives through sheer momentum and is powered by sacrifice, superstition, and the slow, painful grind of countless souls. But what if, just for this one video, because no one else has ever done this before, we asked, how could we actually fix the Imperium? What would we actually need to change? In this video, I'm going to talk through 4 major reforms that I believe could, theoretically, save the Imperium of Man and make it even closer to the Emperor's original vision for humanity. I pulled in as many examples from the lore as I could find, and I've tied them to real-world historical parallels. So, just so you know what you're getting into, the 4 main reforms are: bring back the Imperial truth, taming the Mechanicum, better leaders, and a functioning bureaucracy. Most of these reforms run the gambit from impossible to outright heresy, but they all show just how far the Imperium has fallen from what it is supposed to be. First, though, let's dive into where everything started to really go wrong, when truth became a lie. One of the cornerstones of the Great Crusade was the Emperor's supposed vision of the imperial truth. This was the atheistic belief that there were no gods, and that humanity had agency over its own destiny. The Emperor claimed that religious worship had held back mankind for thousands of years. One of the main promises of the Unification Wars and the subsequent Great Crusade to conquer the galaxy was the defeat of the terrors of Old Night. The Emperor promised the countless billions of humans across the stars that the species was back on the ascendancy. Old Night, also known as the Age of Strife, was the 5,000-year period of history before the Age of the Imperium and after the Age of Technology, when the previously existing interstellar human civilization collapsed. Human society degraded into countless feuding and conflicting cultures that not only warred with each other, but also outside threats and nature itself. Gone was the security that progress and science had brought. People starved. Presumably the first famines in millennia killed countless people. Demons from the warp entered real space and caused doubtless more destruction. There were raids from Xenos threats long thought dealt with. Tales from Old Night are still the stuff of the collective nightmares of mankind more than 10 millennia after it ended. As the Emperor unified Terra, he decreed that only through the reintroduction of things like reason, respect for the scientific method, and secularism could mankind be truly saved. By establishing these ideals at the heart of his new Imperium, mankind would be able to push back the nightmares of Old Night. This meant that not only was there a total separation of church and state in this new, soon-to-be galaxy-spanning nation, but there was to be no religion at all. Churches were taken down, and priests were executed if they didn't adhere to this new ideology. We can see the Emperor debating this philosophy in the short story The Last Church by Graham McNeill. He struggles to understand the seeming need for mankind to have faith. I might spoil this story and a few others, so just a fair warning to you now. In this story, the Emperor has a more materialist view of the universe, and has a rebuttal for any reason someone might have for faith in a divine being. He even offers the last priest on earth, Uriah All-Fair, a position in his new kingdom. Uriah's refusal is indicative of the nature of the Imperium. There is no other philosophy or ideology that is truly able to exist alongside the imperial truth. When he realizes this, Uriah chooses to die inside his burning church. The Emperor is able to answer any question that's brought to him. He has a deep and innate understanding of the universe, far beyond what a normal person is capable of. His abilities give him insight into the very fabric of existence. From this, he was able to discern that gods weren't just unnecessary, but an actual hindrance to humankind. There are plenty of reasons that people could have to disagree with the Emperor, but his stance on religion seems to be, at least for the most part, well thought out. 10,000 years after the end of the Horus Heresy, Uriah's final words had become prophetic. The Emperor is worshipped as a god. Now, before I continue, there are a few benefits to this worship. If, as seems to be the case in the 40k universe, mankind does indeed need to find a faith of some description, the apotheosis of the Emperor is one of the better options. With all the teeming multitudinous masses of mankind giving as much of their thoughts and emotions to the Emperor through prayer and faith, he has slowly but surely been gaining power through the warp. This is the alternate dimension that allows various races the ability to travel faster than the speed of light. It is also where certain gifted individuals, like the Emperor himself, can draw their psychic powers from. The thoughts and emotions of beings in real space echo in the warp, and can give rise or even just strength to the various beings and powers that dwell within that dimension. The Emperor has successfully managed to siphon off plenty of power and worship that would have otherwise gone to the ruinous Chaos Gods. This has earned him the eternal enmity of these beings, and they call him the Anathema as a result. The problem is that there are plenty of people who worship the Emperor, and their lives are still just as miserable and desperate regardless. Once they find out any information about any other beings out there that not only desire their worship, but respond to it, they sometimes convert. This will not only drain the resources, both physical and empiric, that go toward the Emperor, but it also strengthens the forces of the Imperium's greatest threat, that of chaos. If the original ideals of the Imperial truth were still the main ideology of the Imperium, then I doubt this sort of thing would be as much of a threat to the stability of the galaxy as it is. Sure enough, even when given the option to worship beings that have little or nothing to do with the warp, plenty of disgruntled Imperial citizens jump at the chance. There are instances in the lore of people turning to the worship of gene stealer cults and the Tau's greater good, among many others. In an extreme example, there was even the case of one isolated community cut off from the wider Imperium and its advanced technology, turning to the worship of local groups of orcs and even dyeing their skin green to emulate them. Worshipping the Emperor at least gives strength to the main human faction in the setting. Take strength away from many of the worst factions and entities in the galaxy. Since the Imperium is so inefficient and slow to move, things like religious faith are also a great way of instilling good behavior in people. Indeed, there are some examples of this happening in the real world. People have long argued that religious worship has certain benefits to societies. In 1912, Emil Durkheim argued that religion functioned as a sort of social glue. It reinforced collective norms in pre-literate societies. In the Million World Imperium, this could certainly come in useful. In The Society of Religion, Max Weber argued that religious belief systems can legitimize authority and maintain social order. I'm sure the benefits of this for a polity as fractured as the Imperium are pretty obvious. Jared Diamond in Guns, Germs, and Steel/Collapse talks about how religious systems in certain societies have served as mechanisms for environmental management, conflict avoidance, and compliance communal rules. All of this means that for the average gang member in the Underhive, or an illiterate tribe on a pre-industrial world, the fear of the Emperor's judgment is often a more effective way to enforce order than any rulebook. Indeed, even the Emperor's own son, Rabute Guilliman, who is now de facto in charge of the Imperium, thinks that the Excelsiarchy is actually more of a benefit than a negative. When speaking to the priest Frater Matthew in the Plague War series by Guy Haley, while he is highly critical of the Imperial Church, he does say there are benefits to it. But is that enough? Is the Excelsiarchy really enough to save the Imperium? It can keep things ticking along and has for a long time, but by its very design, it is seemingly incapable of improving things at the scale the Imperium needs. And let's be fair, for all his faults, the Emperor was very much able to envision the scale of effort needed to bring mankind back to its zenith. In the Watchers of the Throne series by Chris Wright, we follow a member of the Adeptus Custodes, Valerian. After the collapse of the Astronomicon and the following cessation of all food shipments to Terra, the Custode laments the power of the Imperial Church. For thousands of years prior to the Second Siege of Terra, there was almost nothing built on mankind's ancient homeworld. The entire planet had long been paid over and turned into an ecumenopolis by the end of the 41st millennium. There was no building of the necessary infrastructure to support the population. Instead, far too much effort was put into the building of cathedrals and shrines to the god emperor. As I've already mentioned, there were definite benefits to doing this for the population. But, as was noticed by the custodian, this wasn't sustainable. The population was left vulnerable to attack during the Second Siege, and the population of the world was subject to severe famine. While this system worked well for thousands of years, it worked well until it didn't. The prioritization of the church over the practical and physical needs of the people put the whole of the Imperium in danger. There are other examples too that I just don't have the time to delve into for this video. Regardless, the Custodians are the companions of the Emperor and know all about his plans for mankind during the Great Crusade. Though they are his most loyal servants, they don't worship the Emperor as a god. They still adhere to his initial plans for the Imperial truth. Even though the countless teeming masses of humanity worship the emperor as a god, largely through ignorance and the autocracy of the imperial government, the greatest examples of what humanity could be with a full knowledge of the emperor's capabilities and deeds still don't worship him. And yet, despite all his efforts to abolish faith and religion to bring about a new age of glorious rationality, science, and reason, despite all the terrible cruelty that the Emperor committed to further his goals, he made one enormous exception. He allowed the Mechanicum to keep their faith. This is a theocratic cult of machine worshippers, whose belief system is arguably even more esoteric and fanatical than the Excelsiarchy. But why did he allow this group to exist? Because he needed them more than he needed his idealized imperial truth. Their technology, forges, titans, and other war machines were too important. If he forced his atheistic beliefs, the risk that they would not only abstain from his great crusade, but actually fight against it, was too high. And that was why, arguably, the single biggest compromise in the setting was made, and when the rot that would last millennia set in. You cannot build an empire of rationality on irrational foundations. So let's talk about the Mechanicum, how they became one of the most powerful factions in the whole of the Milky Way galaxy, the damage they do in their current state, and what could be done to help them save the Imperium and the Emperor's vision. The Adeptus Mechanicus of Mars is and was the sister empire to the Imperium. At the outset of the Great Crusade, the Emperor visited the Red Planet and brought the Mechanicum into an alliance. There were plenty of reasons to do it. The Mechanicum had already managed to establish an interstellar empire of forge worlds throughout the galaxy. They even still managed to maintain some contact with at least a few of them, though the exact extent of this is pretty vague. The Emperor quite shrewdly managed to convince the Mechanicum that he was worth following, by taking advantage of their faith in the machine god. The majority of Mars's inhabitants began to worship him as the Omnissiah, the divine manifestation of knowledge. Here I'll just go over the history of the Mechanicum a little. Mars was the first world colonized by mankind in the hazy and distant past, before even the age of technology. It was also an early recipient of terraforming and became lush, verdant, and green. Unfortunately, once the Age of Strife began, the advanced machinery that kept Mars's fragile ecology going fell into disrepair and ultimately failed. In the aftermath of this disaster, the group of people that best survived were those who worship technology. Their dedication to preserving these machines through their reverence of them was often all that kept them running. This meant that they were able to not only keep functioning the delicate technology that produced air, food, and water, but they were also able to produce and maintain more advanced weapons than any of their rivals. Eventually, they unified the re-reddened planet of Mars and started to build colony ships of their own. This exodus was sent out into the stars to recover the lost technology of the fallen human interstellar empire. This goes to one of the core beliefs of the Mechanicus, that all knowledge has been discovered. Their machine god has given this knowledge out to various people throughout the ages, and it's the Mechanicus' duty to recover and preserve this knowledge. Their beliefs are some sort of amalgamation of the outdated notion of a cargo cult and the Brotherhood of Steel from the Fallout series of games. The Brotherhood go out into the wasteland in search of advanced technology, to keep it from falling into the hands of people who would otherwise misuse it. Cargo cult, on the other hand, is a term that's not often used by anthropologists today, as it has some pretty negative connotations for certain communities. But there was a documented phenomenon of people on certain Pacific islands in the aftermath of the Second World War. In some places, people would recreate the uniforms of military personnel and try to land aircraft on the airfields that had been abandoned in the aftermath of the war's end. Their belief was that it was the people who stood on the ground and guided planes down that made them land, not anything else. They wanted the planes to return, as the cargo on board was such a boon to their communities. More recent thinking on this phenomenon, though, is that the Melanesian cultures probably didn't actually really care about the material cargo benefits that powerful Western nations brought. It was probably more of a way for them to incorporate their existing power structures into this newly connected, globalized world. But however real cargo cults may or may not have been, the Mechanicus is definitely based around the concept. To them, things like science, reason, progress are not only taboo, they're sinful. They reproduce the advanced technology of the past with no real understanding of how it works, just through ritual and tradition. Of course, in the lore, there are some members of this faith that believe it to greater or lesser degrees. Some of the more hardline devotees will say a prayer before even flicking a switch, while others might go so far as to practice the scientific method, even if they have to hide that from their compatriots. Regardless, the cult maintains a virtual monopoly on all advanced technology and industry in the galaxy. They don't use these resources for the benefit of the Imperium at large, however. They use it purely out of reverence for it. There's no real economic planning, and consequently very little in the way of economic and industrial progress, just industry for the sake of industry. One of the best examples we see of this in action is in the novel Shroud of Night by Andy Clark. In this story, we follow a group of traitor Alpha Legionaries who are involved in the invasion of an Imperial hive world called Sabzraka. The pronunciations, I'm so sorry, but it's a terrible, terrible spelling. Spoiler alert for the novel as well, okay? During the invasion, the local representatives of the Adeptus Mechanicus keep the Hive's teleportarium device active. Its purpose was to transport the promethium that the planet used as part of its industry and tithe. This was a huge security flaw that wound up being exploited by the forces of chaos. Even though high-ranking officers of the local planetary defense forces pleaded with the Mechanicus' leadership to turn the teleportarium off, the pleas fell on deaf ears. The Mechanicus kept using their advanced machinery for its holy purpose, even in spite of the fact that it hastened the conquest of a vital Imperial world. This is the kind of thing that the Mechanicus leaves the Imperium open to. It's bad enough that this organization has a monopoly on most of the advanced technology and industry. To compound that, it blocks any advancement and real technological progress. Then, to round out this holy trinity of technological temperance, all of this creates some of the most hilariously 40k situations that can be exploited by the enemies of mankind. If the leadership of the Imperium was to ever properly able to get the Mechanicus under control, it would fix some of the most fundamental problems they face. Imagine if the forces of mankind fully understood the workings of their things like Titans, the gene seed of the Space Marines, or were able to better recreate or even rebuild some of their more advanced starships like the Phalanx or even the Gloriana class of battleships. This, of course, relies on the Imperium actually having decent leaders. One of the most common issues that comes up in the lore, though, is the often incompetent leadership that can be found all across the human settled worlds of the galaxy. And this brings me neatly into the next way to save the Imperium of Man. Get better leaders. Okay, so I'm going to say something quite controversial right now. Please bear with me, but I think it's an important point to make, and I am going somewhere with it, okay? The English actually did something right. I know, I know it's not something that anyone should really be saying in the first place, let alone something you'd expect to hear from an Irishman, but 40k is, after all, at its core, an English franchise. Games Workshop, in fact, its stock is one of the best performing out of any British company at the moment. So, what do I mean when I say that the English did something right? One of the things that I think many of us associate with Britain and England in particular is their monarchy. While it might not have the economic benefit to their country, especially when it comes to things like tourism that many people think, over there they do seem to love their monarchy. And if they don't love it, they certainly talk about their monarchy far more than is healthy for anyone involved. Yet, even though their monarch is the head of a church, and whenever any of them get married, it seems like the entire English speaking world has to pay attention to it, the British royal family don't seem to have much actual political power anymore. Starting from the signing of the famous Magna Carta in the early 1200s, the English and later the British have actually done, to their credit, really well in distancing their nation's centre of power away from anything overtly hereditary. Now, they had loads of really good reasons for doing this. Throughout English history, there were countless conflicts over succession rights after the passing of a monarch. Seemingly every generation or two, there was some sort of an English civil war. Cleverly, by diverting power away from a single individual and by moving it more toward a parliament, they not only managed to keep a monarchy, though these days it seems to be more of a show than anything else, but they also managed to create a peaceful and stable way to transfer power between different governments and different generations too. Gone are the days, hopefully, when the death of a single individual leads to civil strife. Look, credit where it's due, I think this has been done really well, but this is not the normal state of affairs in the Imperium of Man. When making comparisons here, let's get the obvious one out of the way first. The Emperor himself. After the duel with his traitorous son, Horus, the Emperor wound up in his eternal state of undeath on the Golden Throne. The description of him sitting there is at the beginning of pretty much every faction codex or rulebook and countless other novels in the setting. As he's on the throne, incapacitated, he is unable to really communicate with anyone properly. While a very select few have been granted an audience with the Emperor since his ascension to the throne, This is far from common, and it's almost an epoch-defining event those rare times it happens. Even still, the emperor is usually able to get his word out when the need is great enough. Some people will try to interpret tarot cards to ascertain meanings and divine his will, others will receive psychic messages from him. In the early history of the Black Legion, when Abaddon was still gathering his strength, the emperor even spoke to him through a manifestation of the Astronomicon. But none of these forms of communication are reliable, and the government of the Imperium often has to interpret his will as best they can. Many try to do this in good faith, and for the benefit of the people they're in charge of, but there are still plenty who are only really in it for themselves. The different interpretations of the word of the Emperor have led to countless wars over the millennia. Now, I'm not here to suggest that the Imperium should kill the Emperor or even replace him. I want to leave that for another video. But again, to be fair, he is in many ways both the Imperium's greatest strength and its greatest weakness. Really a great line for any job interview. He helps Imperial ships navigate the warp, and Imperial psychers communicate over interstellar distances. But he also requires the sacrifice of thousands of psychically gifted people every day. And if this one man were to ever die, his empire would collapse into countless smaller warring states. Very similar to when authoritarians in real history have died, the greater the power that was confided to one individual, seemingly, the greater the chaos and turmoil when they inevitably died. Maybe not right away, but usually eventually. But enough about the Emperor for now. What about the average Imperial world? Surely some of the leaders that are closer to the people are better. Well, the answer is yes and no. There are, of course, some really great leaders in the Imperium of Man, but the stereotype of the average Imperial governor is that of an ineffectual, aristocratic Nepo baby. During the Siege of Vrax, one of the most well-documented conflicts we have in the setting, the Imperial leader for much of the conflict was Lord Commander Zulk, or Zulke. People say it different ways. He was from a noble family and gained his position not out of any military ability, but purely as a result of the family he was born into. This war was seen as a good stepping stone for his military career, and as a result, the Imperial forces suffered years of attrition and defeat. Zulk is a great example, a great 40k example, of another historical trope. Lions being led by donkeys. This was the common conception of how the First World War was run, especially on the Western Front. The Central and Entente powers had millions of men from all over the world, whole generations of nations, stuck in some of the worst conditions any soldiers have ever had to face in the history of warfare. The success of that war was measured in the numbers of human lives and the amount of material that each side could bring to the meat grinder of a conflict. The leaders of these armies were seen to be far away from the front and living in luxury. The Siege of Vrax is a satire of World War I, an ultimately pointless conflict where millions of people died in misery for a cause that was ill-defined and nebulous at best, and completely devoid of humanity at worst. But this is typical of the Imperial leadership. They view human lives as currency. Industry and war are conducted by moving and sacrificing countless billions of people. Countless billions of people. When we see organizations that have the ability and or opportunity to circumvent the traditional imperial power structures, we can see things happen a little differently. Space Marine chapters will recruit from the whole of the human population. The children of hunter-gatherer communities, medieval level farmers, and underhive gangers are all eligible to become elite super soldiers. In fact, many of these lowly born warriors become not only some of the greatest warriors in the galaxy, but some of the greatest leaders and minds that humanity has to offer. The Adeptus Custodes, on the other hand, often recruit from the most powerful aristocratic families on Holy Terra itself. But this tradition seems to have only really been started by the Emperor as a way to enforce his will on the pre-existing powerful families in the places that he conquered. Just like in real life, in the Imperium of Man, ability and heritage have no real bearing on one another. Yes, there are plenty of people that are shown to be excellent rulers and leaders, like Conor Gilliman, but there are plenty of people who are completely ignored and maligned because they were not born into positions of power. This is one of the few times I will ever say this in my life, so I guess it's a great thing it's being recorded, but I think that there's something we can all learn from England, not just the Imperium. The fact is that the English did genuinely make changing the people with positions of power a feature of their government early. I truly believe that this is one of the reasons why England has been one of the longest lasting nation states in the world, and many other successful nations have learned from and even expanded upon this idea of an inbuilt change of leadership as a feature of their society. But in order to do this effectively, there is one thing that really helps. It's something I think the Imperium really struggles with. This is something that I know, we all love with all of our hearts, whether we like to admit it or not. It's bureaucracy. Look, I know we all enjoy a good bit of bureaucratic fun now and again, but just as a quick disclaimer here, I feel the need to tell you all, sometimes too much bureaucracy can be a bad thing. I know it's a controversial take, but it's probably not the only one in this channel, or even this video. To begin with though, you really do need some sort of bureaucracy, at least if you want to have some sort of an organized nation. I mean, it's usually one of the earlier technologies you have to research in most nation building strategy games. But in all seriousness, there are always going to be times when you do need it. One of the many reasons why the Roman Empire collapsed was because of how ineffective and inefficient its bureaucracy became gradually over the course of generations. Conversely, one of the reasons why it was seen as successful in the first place was because it even had bureaucracy. Many of its immediate neighbours weren't nearly as good at maintaining records as the Romans, and were thus not as well able to organise the resources needed to fight them off. Even the Mongol Empire had an adaptive and efficient bureaucracy with entry exams for civil servants. It also took in some of the best parts of local systems that were already in place and used them for what was needed in their specific areas. One of the things the Emperor of Mankind did when creating his Imperium was establishing its equivalent of a civil service. The Administratum effectively runs the Imperium and manages its unimaginable resources across the galaxy. The Munitorum, on the other hand, runs the logistics of the Imperial Guard and maintains the main supply lines throughout the galaxy. Both of these organizations are seen as crucial to the survival of the Imperium of Man. Indeed, they absolutely are. But they are also some of the most ridiculed aspects of the Imperium in the lore. There are plenty of different stories of planets being ruined by Imperial bureaucracy. Let's say they suffered some sort of a disaster or an invasion, and their population and production capacity was severely reduced. That doesn't matter to the Administratum. The tithe level will likely still be set at a pre-existing level, and the now devastated world will have to pay a price that they are likely not able to. The world in question still has to pay its taxes, and if it doesn't, they will be under threat of, at worst, an imperial invasion, or at best, a complete regime change. If you liked the rulers that just got you through that invasion, tough. They couldn't do their real job, which is, of course, to pay taxes to the Emperor of Mankind. If you want to learn more about the imperial money system and its taxes, there should be a link to my video on that topic somewhere either here or in the description. But there are other stories too of worlds that are in the process of fighting off an invasion that are visited by imperial fleets, only to find that they are there to collect whatever weapons, equipment, and manpower they can to ship it off to a completely different war zone. Another really infamous way that the Imperium makes terrible use of its vast amounts of human capital is that they often simply leave entire armies and military groups behind after a conflict. If they are far enough away or just not a high enough priority, they will just be forgotten about and left to rot away on a planet that they have likely never heard of before. This is actually one of the reasons why Roboute Guilliman is one of the most important characters for the Imperium of Man, not just in the current setting, but in previous ages of the lore too. Like all of the Primarchs, Roboute was gifted with powerful abilities by the Emperor. These went beyond merely things like enhanced strength and intelligence. Vulcan, for example, was immortal, Sanguinius was able to both fly and tell the future, which are both pretty great. Gilman, on the other hand, excelled in logistics. Now, this might sound like he got the raw end of the deal here, but it's not the case. Before he encountered the armies of the Emperor, Gilliman had managed to create his own pocket empire of 500 worlds. He was the only person capable of keeping the Imperium together in the aftermath of the Horus Heresy, and he was probably the only force in the whole of the galaxy capable of managing with the aftermath of the Great Rift. Whenever we get a glimpse into the bureaucracy of Terra that Guilliman has to deal with, it is one of the most nightmarish things about the whole setting. There are entire tribes and societies of people who live in areas under the archives of Earth and have conflict with one another. Some of the more fortunate people to live in the setting will spend their whole lives living in small offices processing paperwork. Some of this paperwork is so important that the fate of entire worlds can be decided on individual pieces of vellum, individual pages being lost, or paper pushers running late by mere minutes. In a way, this also goes back to the reverence of machines by the Mechanicus. There are clearly plenty of better ways to process information and perform government services. But, because of the fact that the Imperium doesn't really allow much advanced technology, and the sheer dominance of faith and superstition over reason, improvements to the system will never be tolerated. So, can the Imperium be saved? The answer is no, probably not. Even the Primarchs themselves still struggle to get any amount of reform done, and they are almost definitely not going to be called a heretic or burned alive or something like that. But the point of this video isn't to offer a solution. I just want to show that there could be one. Somewhere, buried under all the sacred paperwork, the millennia of rot and superstition, there is still a spark of humanity left. To paraphrase the words of the great 40k writer Dan Abnett, 40k doesn't have hope with a capital H, but maybe, just maybe, hope with a small h. If you've made it this far in the video, thanks for watching. I know that uploads in this channel have been, well, sporadic to say the least. I'd love to be consistent, but work and life commitments have just been a little all over the place in the last few months. Still though, this is a channel that I really do care about and want to see grow. So if you did like the video, or tolerated it, or even just want to hear more of my lovely accent, please feel free to leave a comment, share it, and hit subscribe. It all really does help a lot. More lore, more real-world comparisons, and more heretical speculation will all be coming soon. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.